Part 1. The sky over Nevada turned strange just after lunchtime. One moment it was clear blue, the next it shimmered like heat rising off desert sand. Then the ships came. Not one or two, but hundreds, silent, massive, and shaped like jagged obsidian blades hanging in the air. People stopped their cars on the highway, dropped their coffee cups, and stared up with wide eyes. No one screamed at first. They just watched, frozen, as the impossible filled the sky. Inside a low concrete building at Nellis Air Force Base, Captain Luke Dawson was reviewing flight logs when the alarms went off. Not the usual drill sirens, but the deep pulsing wail reserved for global emergencies. He ran to the command center, boots echoing on the tile floor. On every screen, the same image. A swarm of alien vessels parked neatly in geosynchronous orbit. Unmoving, unreadable. Across the room, Maya Ruiz stood with her arms crossed, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was an aerospace engineer, not military, but she'd been consulting on drone telemetry when the alert hit. Now she was studying the data streaming in from satellites and ground radar. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, eyes narrowed. "They're not scanning us like a threat," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "They're observing, like we're a museum exhibit." Luke joined her, frowning at the readouts. "Museum exhibit? Maya, they just parked a fleet the size of Manhattan over our planet. That's not tourism." "Maybe not," she replied, "but look at their positioning. They're avoiding major cities. No weapons lock-ons. No jamming our comms. If they wanted to blow us up, they'd have done it already." Outside, the world was unraveling. News channels cut to shaky phone footage from Tokyo, London, Rio, all showing the same black ships hanging in the sky. Government scrambled. Emergency broadcasts urged calm, but panic spread faster than the signal. Supermarkets emptied. Airports shut down. In less than an hour, humanity went from arguing over politics and sports to wondering if tomorrow would even come. Then the message came. It wasn't audio. It wasn't video. It was a data burst, clean, precise, and translated automatically by global defense networks. The words appeared on every screen connected to the internet, every military terminal, even some smart refrigerators. "You are designated primitive anomaly 7 Gamma. Cease all orbital activity. Surrender planetary governance within 72 hours. Resistance will be neutralized." The tone was calm, clinical, like a doctor telling a patient to take off their shirt. World leaders called emergency summits. Generals dusted off doomsday protocols. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was a hoax. But Luke and Maya knew it was real, and something about it didn't add up. That night, while most of the base was on high alert, they worked in a dimly lit side room filled with old servers and half-empty coffee cups. Ben Carter, a linguist from the University of Nevada who'd been brought in for translation support, sat hunched over a laptop chewing on a pen cap. "I've run the message through every linguistic model we have," he said, voice hoarse from hours of talking. "The phrase neutralized is tricky. In their language structure, it doesn't mean destroyed. It means contained, like isolating a virus." Luke leaned back in his chair. "So they don't want to kill us. They want to lock us in a box." "Exactly," Maya said, pulling up a star map. "And look at this. They're ships, they're old. Not in a rusty way, but worn hull stress fractures, power fluctuations. One of them even vented coolant over the Pacific. That's not an invasion fleet. That's a refugee convoy with guns." Ben blinked. "Refugees. Think about it," Maya continued. "They show up out of nowhere, scared of us, demanding control, but they won't fire a shot. What if they're not here to conquer? What if they're running from something worse?" Luke stared at the screen showing the alien armada. It was hard to imagine beings that powerful being afraid. But then again, humans had done plenty of terrible things out of fear too. Over the next few hours, they dug deeper. Maya hacked into a low-orbit satellite feed unofficially and caught a glimpse of a Vireth ship. That's what they called themselves, based on a repeated signal prefix, making a slow, careful pass over the Amazon rainforest. Not scanning for minerals or military bases, but mapping biodiversity. Another ship hovered near the Great Barrier Reef, sensors active but passive. "They're studying us like we're a nature preserve," Ben whispered. "And they don't like what they see," Luke added. "Too messy, too loud, too unpredictable." By dawn, the three of them had a theory. The Vireth came from a civilization that valued order above all else. Their society had collapsed because they erased emotion, creativity, anything that caused chaos. Now seeing Earth, a planet where people argued, painted, fell in love, and rebuilt after disasters, they were terrified. Not of our weapons, but of our freedom. The rest of the world didn't know this. All they saw was an ultimatum from the sky. Nations began moving troops. Russia tested a missile. China powered up its orbital lasers. The US put bombers on standby. War felt inevitable. But in that quiet room in Nevada, Luke, Maya, and Ben knew the truth was stranger and more fragile than anyone imagined. The aliens weren't monsters. They were lost. And if humanity reacted with fear instead of understanding, both species might end up destroyed. Luke stood by the window as the first light of morning touched the desert. The Virith ship still hung in the sky, silent and dark. He thought about his little sister back in Oregon, probably scared out of her mind. He thought about Maya's dog waiting for her at home. He thought about Ben's daughter who'd sent him a drawing of Earth with hearts around it just last week. "We can't fight them," Luke said quietly. "But we can't surrender either." Maya nodded. "So we show them something they've never seen before." "What's that?" Ben asked. "Us," she said. "Not as soldiers or nations, just people." Outside, the world braced for war. But inside that room, a different kind of mission began. Not with guns, but with hope. And somewhere high above, the Virith watched, waiting to see if this chaotic, noisy, beautiful species was worth saving or silencing. The Virith gave humanity 48 hours to surrender. Not 72 as first stated, but 48. Shorter, sharper, like a blade pulled tighter. Global news channels repeated the countdown endlessly. Clocks ticked in every home, every bunker, every heart. Governments prepared for the worst. Fighter jets patrolled coastlines. Submarines dove deep. In cities, people hugged their loved ones tighter, said things they'd been too shy or angry to say before. The world held its breath. But in a secure wing of Nellis Air Force Base, Luke, Maya, and Ben weren't watching the clock. They were watching data. Strange data. The Virith ships hadn't moved an inch since arriving, yet their energy signatures flickered like dying light bulbs. Maya had rerouted a decommissioned weather satellite to skim the edge of the alien fleet, and what it sent back confused her. The ships were leaking heat in odd patterns, not from engines, but from internal systems. One vessel even powered down for 3 hours overnight, something no military craft would do during a standoff. "They're not just old," Maya said, rubbing her tired eyes. "They're breaking down." Ben leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the thermal readouts. "If they're so fragile, why threaten us at all?" "Because they think we're worse," Luke said from the doorway. He'd just come back from a briefing with generals who wanted to launch a preemptive strike using experimental railguns. He'd argued against it, barely holding them off. "They see our history. Wars, pollution, greed, and assume we'll turn on them the second we get the chance. To them, chaos is a disease." Maya nodded slowly, and there the doctors with a scalpel. Just then an alert pinged on Ben's laptop. He'd been running linguistic comparisons between the Virith message and fragments of their internal comms intercepted by deep space listening posts. Something had matched. "Listen to this," he said, plugging in headphones and playing a short audio clip. It was distorted, but beneath the static, a voice, calm, almost weary, spoke in the Virith tongue. Ben had overlaid a rough translation. "Anomaly 7 Gamma exhibits high emotional volatility. Social structures unstable. Recommend immediate quarantine to prevent cognitive contamination." "Cognitive contamination?" Luke repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means they're scared we'll infect them," Maya said, eyes wide. "Not with germs. With ideas. With feelings." Ben pulled up another file. In their records, their own civilization collapsed after they banned all forms of unregulated thought. Art, music, personal choice, all gone. They called it the Great Silence. It lasted 2 centuries before their society just stopped. No births. No innovation. Just waiting to die. A heavy silence filled the room. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. "So they're not here to conquer," Luke said. "They're here to make sure no one else makes their mistake." "And they think we're the mistake," Maya added. The weight of it settled over them. Humanity wasn't the enemy. It was the warning. But the world didn't know that. And time was running out. That afternoon, a Virith drone, small, sleek, shaped like a teardrop, detached from the main fleet and descended toward the Arizona desert. It didn't attack. It hovered over an abandoned mining town, scanning the ruins with soft blue pulses. Then without warning it sputtered, tilted, and crashed into a dry riverbed. Within minutes, Luke was suited up and in a transport chopper, Maya beside him with a field toolkit, Ben monitoring from base. They reached the crash site under a blazing sun. The drone lay half buried in red sand, its surface cracked, one wing melted from atmospheric entry. It was dead but not silent. Maya carefully pried open a panel on its side. Inside, a core glowed faintly. She connected a portable decoder and held her breath as data began to stream. "It's not military," she whispered. "It's a research log." They found logs of Earth observations, children laughing in a park, farmers sharing water during a drought, a street musician playing for coins. The Virith analyst who recorded it had labeled each entry with confusion. One note read, "Na subject displays joy without purpose. No reward observed. Hypothesis: malfunction or cultural defect." Another showed footage of a rescue team pulling survivors from earthquake rubble. The Virith comment: high-risk behavior with no personal gain, illogical yet repeated across species. Ben translated more as Maya copied the files. "They don't understand kindness," he said, voice thick. "To them, everything must have a reason. A trade, a gain, but humans help each other just because." Luke stared at the broken drone. No wonder they're scared. "We don't make sense." Back at base, they pieced together the full picture. The Virith weren't evil. They were traumatized. Their entire history taught them that freedom leads to ruin. And Earth, with its messy democracy, wild art, and stubborn hope, looked like a ticking bomb. But there was more. Buried in the drone's final log was a coded message, not from command, but from the analyst himself. It was short, almost hidden. "If silence is death, then noise may be life. Observe further." "He's questioning them," Maya said, stunned. "One of them is starting to wonder if we're not the problem." But the answer? Hope flickered, fragile but real. Yet outside their small circle, fear ruled. The UN Security Council voted to activate orbital defense grids. China announced it would launch decoy satellites to confuse the Virith. Russia moved nuclear subs into firing positions. The countdown hit 36 hours. Luke knew they had to act fast. If war started, it wouldn't matter who was right. Everyone would lose. "We can't tell the world the truth," Ben said. "No one would believe us. They'd call it propaganda or panic." "But we can show them something they can't ignore," Maya replied. She turned to Luke. "What if we don't fight? What if we show them exactly what they're afraid of and prove it's not a weakness?" Luke understood. "You mean, show them us being human?" "Not just any humans," Ben added. "The best of us." They began planning, quietly, carefully. Using back channels, Maya contacted scientists, artists, teachers, people who represented what Earth truly was. Not its wars, but its wonders. Not its greed, but its generosity. Meanwhile, the Virith fleet remained still, watching, waiting. Unaware that the species they feared most was about to do the one thing they couldn't predict: reach out with open hands instead of clenched fists. As night fell again, Luke stood on the roof of the base looking up at the silent ships. He thought about the Virith analyst who dared to question. He thought about his sister, probably watching the sky with the same fear he felt. And he made a decision. If the Virith saw humanity as chaos, then let them see chaos with a heart. Let them see that sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe isn't a weapon. It's a hand offered in peace, and if that didn't work, at least they'd tried. Because surrender wasn't the only option. Understanding was. The world prepared for war. But Luke, Maya, and Ben prepared something else. They called it Project Lullaby. Not because it was soft, but because it was meant to calm a storm. While generals argued over missile trajectories, they gathered voices, images, and moments that showed what Earth really was. Not a planet of soldiers, but of storytellers, healers, dancers, and dreamers. Maya reached out to friends in Nairobi, Mumbai, Buenos Aires, and Oslo. She asked for one thing: send us what makes your people human. Within hours, files poured in. A grandmother in Seoul teaching her grandson to fold paper cranes. Fishermen in Indonesia sharing their catch with a rival village after a storm. A choir in Johannesburg singing in the rain. A boy in Cairo fixing a broken robot for his little sister just to see her smile. Ben worked with linguists and musicians to translate emotions, not just words. He compiled songs without lyrics, just hums, drums, flutes that carried joy, sorrow, hope. He included a recording of a newborn's first cry, followed by its mother's laugh. Simple sounds, powerful ones. Luke handled the hard part, getting it all into space. The military wouldn't allow an official broadcast. It looked too much like surrender. So they went around them, using old emergency broadcast protocols and hacked satellite uplinks. They stitched together a global signal, not from one nation, but from all of them. They called it the Earth Pulse. 24 hours before the Virith deadline, they sent it. At first, nothing happened. The alien fleet stayed dark. News outlets mocked the effort as a last-minute prayer. Some called it naive. But in quiet rooms across the planet, people watched their screens and felt something shift. For the first time in days, they weren't thinking about bombs. They were remembering why Earth was worth saving. Aboard the Virith command ship, High Commander Vor watched the signal with cold eyes. He saw humans dancing in streets, planting trees, holding hands across battle lines. He saw a firefighter carry an old woman from a burning building, then kneel to pet her cat. He saw children drawing pictures of the black ships, not as monsters, but as guests. "This is manipulation," Vor said to his council. "Emotional noise to weaken our resolve." But not everyone agreed. Kyle, the young analyst who had studied Earth logs since arrival, stood silently in the back. He had watched the Earth pulse 3 times already. Each time something inside him stirred, a feeling his people had no name for. It wasn't logic, it wasn't duty. It was warmth. Later, alone in his quarters, Cale replayed a clip of a man in New Orleans playing a trumpet on a flooded street while neighbors passed sandbags hand to hand. The music was raw, imperfect, full of life. Cale touched the screen as if he could feel the sound. Back on Earth, Luke and Maya monitored Virith responses. Their sensors showed no weapon activation, no movement. But something else was happening. Their comms traffic had spiked. Not orders, questions, debates. One phrase repeated often, "Is this real?" "It's working," Maya whispered. Ben nodded, eyes tired but bright. They're not used to beauty without purpose. Then came the real test. The Virith issued a new message. Short, direct. "Cease transmission, it causes system instability." Luke frowned. "System instability? What does that mean?" Maya's face lit up. "It means their tech can't handle it. Their ships are built on pure logic. Emotion, real, unfiltered human emotion, is like a virus to their systems. Not a weapon, just truth." Ben grinned. "We're not attacking them, we're confusing their fear." But the Virith High Command didn't see it that way. To them, instability was danger, and danger required control. A new order went out across the fleet. Prepare for quarantine protocol. Not destruction, but isolation. They would deploy orbital dampeners, devices that would shut down all electromagnetic activity on Earth. No power, no comms, no internet. Just silence. For decades, maybe centuries, until humanity stabilized. Cale heard the order and felt something snap inside him. He had spent his life obeying. But now, watching a video of a girl in Kenya sharing her lunch with a stray dog, he knew silence wasn't peace. It was death. He made a choice. Using a private channel, he sent a warning to Earth. Encrypted, brief, but clear. Dampeners active in 12 hours. Grids will fall. Prepare. The message reached Nellis just as Luke was about to sleep. He read it and woke Maya and Ben in seconds. "They're not going to fight us," Luke said. "They're going to turn off our world." Maya's mind raced. If they drop the grids, hospitals lose power, water pumps stop. Millions could die, not from war, but from darkness. Ben paced. "We can't stop the dampeners, but maybe we can hide." Maya's eyes narrowed. "A blackout drill. We fake it." It was risky. Global coordination in less than 12 hours, but they had no choice. Using emergency networks, they contacted power grid operators, tech companies, and city leaders. The plan: at the exact moment the dampeners activate, Earth would go dark on purpose. Every city, every home, every device, shut down as if already hit. But hidden backup systems would keep critical functions running just enough to survive. It wouldn't fool the Vireth forever, but it might buy time. As the hours ticked down, people around the world received quiet instructions, not through news, but through community leaders, radio whispers, text chains. At 3 a.m. local time, turn off your lights. Unplug your devices. Stay quiet. In Tokyo, families blew out candles. In Berlin, subway trains stopped. In São Paulo, streetlights dimmed one by one. The planet held its breath again, but this time, not in fear. In unity. Aboard the Vireth flagship, Kyle watched Earth go dark. His heart pounded. He hoped the humans understood. He hoped they were ready. And then, just before the dampeners fired, Luke launched one last message, not through satellites, but through an old military shuttle retrofitted with a single data crystal. Inside it, every story, every song, every tear and laugh they'd collected. A tiny arc of humanity. He didn't know if it would reach them, but he had to try. Because if the Vireth saw only silence, they'd assume they'd won. But if they saw what lived inside that silence, hope, kindness, stubborn joy, maybe they'd finally understand. Earth wasn't broken. It was alive. And sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is a species that refuses to stop caring. The Vireth command ship hung in the dark, silent as a tomb. Inside its cold halls, High Commander Vor stood before a massive screen showing Earth, now black, still, lifeless. No lights, no signals, just a quiet blue marble spinning in the void. The dampeners had fired. The quarantine was in place. To his eyes, the threat was contained. But Kale knew better. He had watched the moment Earth went dark. Too perfect, too fast. Real collapse would have been messy. Flickering grids, panicked signals, emergency beacons. This was clean, planned, human. He said nothing, not yet. But his hands trembled as he reviewed the final logs from the dampener activation. Buried in the noise, a tiny anomaly. A single shuttle launched just minutes before blackout, moving fast and low, heading straight for the Vireth fleet. It carried no weapons. Only a small pod ejected before the shuttle turned back. Kale traced its path. It had been sucked into the flagship's air filtration intake. A routine debris capture. Standard procedure, no alarm raised. He waited until the night shift changed, then slipped into the maintenance bay. There, in a sealed containment unit, sat the pod. Small, scorched, humming faintly. He opened it with stolen clearance codes. Inside lay a crystal, glowing soft blue. He plugged it into a private terminal. At first, nothing. Then sound a child's voice singing off-key, rain falling on a tin roof, a dog barking, laughter, a violin playing in an empty subway station. Footage flickered, a nurse holding a baby in a war-zone hospital, a farmer teaching his son to plant seeds, strangers hugging after an earthquake, a boy giving his shoes to someone with none. Kyle stood frozen. His chest felt tight, his eyes burned. These were not acts of logic. They made no sense. And yet they felt right. He watched for hours. He saw humans argue, yes, but also forgive. He saw them hurt, but also heal. He saw them lose everything and still share what little they had left. This was not chaos. This was courage, and it terrified him, because it meant everything his people believed was wrong. Back on Earth, the fake blackout held. People sat in candlelit homes, listening to battery-powered radios, waiting. Luke, Maya, and Ben stayed in the command room, hearts pounding, watching Vireth comms for any sign of reaction. So far silent, they either bought it, or they're planning something worse, Luke said. Maya shook her head. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have. They're waiting. Watching. Ben rubbed his temples. Kale's our only hope now. Aboard the flagship, Kale made his decision. He couldn't keep this to himself. He copied the crystal's contents onto a secure drive and sent it, not to command, but to every senior officer on the ship. He included a note. We were wrong. They are not broken. They are whole. Then he ran. Alarms blared within minutes. Security teams flooded the halls. Kale ducked into service tunnels, the drive clutched in his hand. He knew he'd be caught. But maybe, just maybe, someone would watch the footage before they silenced him. High Commander Vor received the file with cold fury. He ordered it deleted, but not before his second-in-command, a veteran named Tara, opened it out of curiosity. She watched a clip of a woman in Bangladesh building a school from bamboo after a flood. Her hands were rough, her clothes torn, but her eyes shone with purpose. Tara, who had not smiled in 20 years, felt something stir in her chest. She didn't delete it. Instead, she played it for others. One by one, Virith officers watched. Some turned away in disgust. Others stared silent for hours. A few wept, quiet, confused tears they didn't understand. Vor saw the unrest spreading. He called an emergency council. "This is contamination," he growled. "Shut it down. Purge all copies," but Tara stood. "Why? Because it makes us feel? Because it shows us something we lost?" "You speak like a child," Vor snapped. "No," she said. "I speak like someone who just remembered what it means to be alive." The room fell silent. On Earth, the countdown to the end of quarantine ticked toward 0. 12 hours left. People began to whisper. Would the lights come back on? Or would the silence become forever? Then a signal, not a threat, not a demand. A question, broadcast on all channels in clear, simple English. "How do you survive yourselves?" Luke stared at the screen. Maya gasped. Ben whispered, "They're asking for help." It was Kale's doing. From a hidden comms terminal in the ship's lower decks, he'd sent the message before security dragged him away. He didn't know if anyone would answer, but he had to try. Luke didn't hesitate. He grabbed a mic. "We don't survive by being perfect," he said, voice steady. "We survive by helping each other. Even when it hurts. Even when it makes no sense. Especially then." His words went out across the planet and into the Virith fleet. On the flagship, Vor listened. He thought of his own world, gray and empty, where no one sang, no one dreamed, no one dared to hope. He thought of the woman building the school, the boy sharing his shoes, the nurse holding the baby. He looked at Tara. "What if we've been afraid of the wrong thing all along?" She nodded. Maybe the real danger wasn't chaos, but silence. High above Earth, the Virith Armada powered down its dampeners. One by one, the lights of human cities flickered back to life, not because the threat was gone, but because a new understanding had begun. And deep in the ship's brig, Kyle heard the engine's shift tone. He smiled, even as the guards locked his cell, because somewhere a child was singing again, and this time someone was listening. The Virith Armada did not leave. It did not attack. Instead, it changed. One by one, the black ships powered down their weapons, retracted their shields, and opened channels of peace. The message that came through was simple, spoken not by a commander but by a young analyst named Kale, now free and standing beside High Commander Vor himself. "We ask not to rule you. We ask to learn from you." On Earth, people stood in the streets staring up at the sky, not with fear but with wonder. The lights were back. The radios played music again. Children ran outside, pointing at the ships that no longer looked like blades, but like open hands. Luke, Maya, and Ben watched from the roof of Nellis Base as the first Virith shuttle descended, not to a military zone, but to a field in New Mexico where scientists, teachers, and artists waited with open arms. The ramp lowered slowly. Out stepped Kale, followed by Tara and a small group of Virith observers. They wore no armor, just simple gray suits, their faces calm but curious. A little girl stepped forward, holding a drawing of a Virith ship with rainbow wings. She handed it to Kale. He took it gently, his long fingers trembling. He did not speak, but his eyes shone with something new, gratitude. Over the next weeks, the world changed in quiet ways. Virith envoys walked among humans, awkward at first, then slowly more at ease. They tried pizza in Chicago and made faces at the cheese. They sat in parks in Paris, listening to street musicians. In Mumbai, a Virith elder cried the first time she heard a lullaby sung by a mother to her baby. She later said it was the most beautiful sound she had ever known. Maya helped set up the first cultural exchange center on the moon, a neutral place where both species could meet without fear. It was built inside an old lunar habitat, warmed by human laughter and Virith curiosity. Luke flew shuttles between Earth and the station, often carrying crates of books, musical instruments, seeds, and handmade gifts. Ben taught Virith linguists not just words, but jokes, proverbs, and the meaning behind a hug. The Virith, in turn, shared what little they had left of their own past, fragments of poetry from before the Great Silence, star maps of worlds they once visited, and quiet meditations on balance and stillness. Humans learned to sit in silence without fear. Virith learned to speak without permission. Back on Earth, life returned to normal, but not the same normal. People were kinder, slower to anger, more willing to listen. The near miss with extinction had reminded everyone what mattered. Not power, not control, but connection. Kyle became a bridge between worlds. He traveled constantly, always carrying a small notebook filled with human phrases he collected. His favorite was one he heard from a boy in Oregon. "Adorable, watch this." The boy had said it while teaching his robot dog to fetch a ball. Kyle didn't fully understand adorable, but he liked how it sounded. Soft, warm, full of care. He used it often when describing Earth to his people. Eventually, he wrote a book. Not a report, not a log, a story. He called it Adorable, Watch This. In it, he described humans not as anomalies, but as teachers. He wrote about the woman who shared her lunch with a stray dog, the firefighter who saved a cat, the grandmother folding paper cranes. He ended with a simple truth. We came to silence a storm. Instead, we found a song. And now we learn to sing. The book spread across the Virith fleet. Copies were read aloud in their halls. Young Virith began drawing again. First lines, then shapes, then pictures of Earth sunsets. Some even tried to dance, though they were clumsy at first. Their elders watched, not with disapproval but with tears. On Earth, schools added Virith history to their lessons, not as enemies, but as friends who had lost their way and found it again. Children wrote letters to Virith kids, sending them drawings of trees, oceans, and smiling faces. One girl in Kenya sent a seed from her garden. Months later, a tiny green sprout grew in a Virith greenhouse, the first living plant on their ships in centuries. Luke visited Kale often on the lunar station. They sat by a window overlooking Earth, sipping terrible instant coffee that Kyle insisted on drinking like a human. "You saved us," Luke said once. Kyle shook his head. "You saved yourselves. You chose kindness when you could have chosen fear. That is the real miracle." Maya stood beside them, watching Earth turn slowly below. She thought of all the times humans had failed each other, but also of all the times they had risen, after fires, floods, wars, and now an alien sky. They were messy, flawed, loud, but they never stopped trying, and that, she realized, was their greatest strength. The galaxy had assumed humanity would fall to superior force. Instead, Earth had disarmed an empire with a lullaby, a drawing, a shared meal. No lasers, no bombs, just heart. Years later, when new alien ships appeared at the edge of the solar system, lost, scared, searching, the Virith were the first to greet them. Not with weapons, but with open comms and a message recorded by a child on Earth. "Hello. We're learning too. Want to learn together?" And so the song grew, not perfect, not loud, but steady. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe isn't a weapon. It's a hand offered in peace, a voice that says, "Watch this," and a heart brave enough to hope.